Ken, thank you ever so much for contributing to our book that we've just published with the Higher Education Policy Institute, which sets out why entrepreneurial leadership is needed now in the higher education sector. You one of 10 really senior leaders we've got that have contributed to that thinking. And really, I've got an answer to that, but I'd really like to know why you think entrepreneurial leadership is needed now.
I think it comes down to what do you mean by entrepreneurial leadership? And in the end, what you're trying to do is take a whole raft of uncertainties and turn them into things which have a positive outcome and a positive destination. And if I think about the time I've been in the sector, I don't think there's ever been a time where there have been more unknown variables or things that feel beyond our control. So we've got a funding system which we know is under pressure, but we don't know what the solution to it is. We've got a geopolitical system which is highly turbulent, and yet the future of the sector depends on it. And we've got shifts in demand. You've got some students who would naturally still go to a university in a particular place. Other people want to learn in a different way. Other people want to stay in the world of work and do degree apprenticeships. So I think we need more of a startup mindset, which is to not be constrained by the thinking that we've had in our past. And that's not to say you abandon your strengths. Of course you don't do that. They've been built up over many, many decades. But I think in our organisational decision making, we need to think more like a startup, because for some institutions, the cash is more short term than it was before. That's what startups face. Sometimes you're trying to do things when you're not 100% sure you've got either capacity in the right place, capability in the right place. That's a startup mindset. But what it does protect you from is the notion that you're carrying forward a legacy understanding of a time, because in the end, we're not ever going back. Nothing's ever going to take us back there. So that's really where I'm coming from. I think if you've got turbulence, uncertainty, but it's balanced by the fact that we are incredibly positive organisations with huge capability, huge long-term capabilities, and we make a positive difference to society. I think if you want to get the best of both of those dimensions, that requires entrepreneurial leadership.
And so you describe in your essay optimistic tenacity, and I'm sure everyone can take from that what they how they would interpret it. How would you say it demonstrates itself in Harper?
So I think being a specialist institution and being an institution which doesn't have the resources that a much larger institution has, we can hit pressure points very, very quickly. We can also get out of those pressure points very, very quickly. So we've got very agile governance, very agile decision making, but you can be rocked and affected quite quickly by certain things that can happen. A minor change in the way the Office for Students sees something or Ofsted sees something can have a massive reverberation in a smaller institution. So you do have to be tenacious and you have to keep going. But the optimism, I have to say, comes from the culture of the people who are here. So we've got a value set which effectively describes people here in 4 different ways. One is around curious minds. So curiosity to understand what it is they're doing. Practical hands, so taking that curiosity and that knowledge that comes through the curiosity and doing something with it. Courageous hearts, and actually having an interest in what happens to people. So people here genuinely care who gets access to food, how animals are looked after, what happens to the land, what happens to waterways, what happens to all of those different things. So there's a courage that underpins that. And then the unifying value is growing together, which is we are a community and we take an interest in each other. So I always say, I've said this throughout my time in higher education, that it's possible to have a bad day. Everyone can have a bad day. But a whole institution can't have a bad day, because there's someone in your institution whose mind is being opened up. There's a discovery being made. There's a next generation of professionals being set up, whether it's lawyers or medics or anything else. And how can that not instill optimism? And I think one of the things that we've got to be really careful of is, yes, we've got to be open about the challenges, we've got to be open about the funding challenges, we've got to be open about how existential it is for some institutions at this moment in time. But we've got to have an optimistic message for the society that we're part of, because if we don't, one, they won't hear the benefit that we bring, and I think there is lots of examples that they're not hearing that benefit. But more fundamentally, we won't communicate clearly to the next generation that this still should be part of the path through which they go, through out of education, through developments of knowledge and skills, and then into the workplace. So whatever happens and however difficult it gets, that optimism is really, really important. But being tenacious is what's ultimately going to help us to survive.
Brilliant, that's great. I mean, and I think the word courage is a really interesting word at the moment. And I think for higher education, we do need to be courageous
We do.
as a sector, because it's easy when things are difficult to revert and pull back, and actually it's the courage that will take us forward to the next.
100%. I think, we've all got to look at it and say that the economy of our country is not going in the direction that we need it to. The aspiration of the country doesn't feel like it's set in the right place. We're seeing pockets of communities where hope has all but disappeared, and yet universities and higher education institutions are all over the country. So if we cannot bring optimism, of course it's got to be realistic, but if we can't bring optimism and we can't be tenacious when society around us is under pressure, then we're not living up to the mandate of being long-term institutions, because our job is not to be hankering down with what's actually happening currently. It's to find the path through to get to the other side of it, so that society can continue to benefit from having a world-leading higher education system.
So, I think you've read all the other contributions to that book as well, which push boundaries and try and take us into that next phase. So thanks very much for your contribution to that, and I know you'll continue to support us with our Leaders programme as well.
Absolutely.
to try and build that next generation that can be entrepreneurial and courageous of thought.
And we're looking forward to welcoming the leaders next year on our campus.
Yeah, it'll be great, is it? Thanks, Ken.